you've probably heard this number that about 70% of business and digital transformations fail, right?
Sure.
That's
Oh
from
yeah.
McKinsey, Bain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our success rate is more like 90%. So, and that's because we spend a lot of time on the planning, on the figuring out what success looks like, and then kind of coaching and mentoring people through that process.
Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. This is Darren Pulsford, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host. On this episode, GenAI and Digital Transformation Strategies for Success with special guest George Stelling from Quadrillion Partners. George, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Darren. Happy to be here.
Hey, George, I remember it was a while ago that we first talked, and it's been some time to get you on our schedules lined up. But today we're going to talk about digital transformation and specifically AI's role, because AI is very disruptive, kind of like Donald
Yep.
Trump in the U.S. government, very disruptive.
For
And
sure.
no one can argue that. That's not even political. Everyone's going to say that. AI is doing the same sort of thing in business. But before we dive into that, George, I only have superheroes on my show, and every superhero has a backstory. George, what's your backstory?
Yeah. So for me, I was a developer and database administrator a long time ago, and went off to business school. Worked at a company called Bain and Company, if you guys know Bain,
Oh yeah.
doing strategy consulting both in the U.S. and in South Africa for about 5 years. Then went into the semiconductor industry. I was at On Semiconductor, running pricing, sales operations, et cetera, during a larger transformation. And From there, I actually wound up at a company called NVIDIA, which at the time nobody really knew about. That was back in 2005. Was at NVIDIA for about 3 years. I was their first chief information officer and what we called head of global services. So I started a procurement group there. Also ran IT infrastructure and projects. That was at a point when we were largely a California-based company and we were looking to globalize, about a
Right.
billion in revenue. When I left, we were 4 billion. GPU business was doing gangbusters. It was very, very good time. After that, I actually went into private equity and started my own fund here in the Dallas area very successfully. Left that fund in 2012 and started Quadrillion Partners. And the common theme, Darren, throughout my entire career has been kind of business and digital transformation. So it's an area that I've focused on for a long time and I find very interesting. And, the whole AI thing, AI trends, et cetera, is now morphing it in a different
In a
direction,
huge,
but I think
yeah, huge way.
important
Yeah.
to, yeah.
So, the one question all my audience is wondering: did you hold on to your Nvidia stock?
The answer is yes. So
Well,
obviously
congratulations.
did well on the options since I was on the leadership team there, but I also have been an investor since then. So yeah, like a lot of people, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and I
Oh
hope it
yeah.
continues. So
I hope that they start building their chips with Intel, but that's another story. We won't get into that. But so George, you started Quadrillion Partners to help organizations go through these digital transformations.
yeah.
How was that transition for you to go from working in the corporate world into now you're running your own business, you're consulting. How was that transition for you?
It actually was quite smooth. Our point of differentiation, Darren, is we actually work actively on the implementation. So, for us,
So
it's
you're
not
not
just
just slideware jockey.
exactly. We're not just PowerPoint people. We
Okay.
and my background, given strong finance background as well as IT background, has been really helpful because we often go into companies, stand up a transformation office. That transformation office will naturally have, business initiatives that you're pursuing, but it has usually an underlying element of a lot of technology that you're going to deploy. And you have to kind of justify all that technology, right? There's some investments that I would argue are difficult to prove benefits on, as most technology people know. And there's
Right.
some that it's easier, right? So I'm in a very good position, as are some other folks on our team here, to kind of bridge that gap. So I'm very comfortable standing up before a management team or talking to a board of directors to say, hey, here's our strategy. Here's the 4 or 5 initiatives we're going to do. here are the business cases we built out, and here's how we can help you implement those over the next 36 months so that you capture that value. And we're big fans of KPIs, and that's one of the things that I learned early in my career, both at On Semiconductor and NVIDIA, that measurements matter. And so we for every one of our engagements, we spend a fair amount of time with the team, whether it's the management team, the IT team, the functional team, or the board, flushing through 3 to 5 key metrics that we think are really important for the overall program and the initiatives, and try to measure success against those so that you can celebrate your wins early and also make sure that you're getting value from the program. So I think you
So,
probably have heard this. You've probably heard this number that about 70% of business and digital transformations fail, right? That's
oh
from
yeah,
McKinsey, Bain.
yeah.
Yeah. And our success rate is more like 90%. So, and that's because we spend a lot of time on the planning, on the figuring out what success looks like, and then kind of coaching and mentoring people through that process.
So, a good question I have. I don't know if it's a good question, but it's a question I have. Do you see common key metrics in every engagement? Can you? You said you identify five, but
Yeah.
are there a set five that you use every single time, or are there categories? I mean, how do you go about? Because that's the most important aspect, right? Those key
Right.
metrics, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't know which direction I'm headed.
I think almost every single engagement, we capture a view on what the impact is on EBITDA, right? So whether it's an investment, CapEx or OpEx, whether it's something that really is going to generate fall through to EBITDA to let you grow it, or whether it's just kind of an investment. So that's one that we always look at in every single one of our initiatives, right? Another common one, not surprisingly, is either revenue or gross margin growth, right? So we're trying to figure out, are you growing market share? Are you growing opportunities because you have a new product in the market or a derivative product or whatever it is? And what's kind of the overall goal against that? And our metrics, Darren, we're big fans of building out business cases that are usually anywhere between 36 and 60 months by month. And we build those out very explicitly with these KPIs to have goals to measure against. It doesn't mean and doesn't suggest that teams hit those goals every month, because it tends to be a bit choppy. Sometimes they miss, sometimes they don't. But we found that to be really helpful to kind of get everybody in the company on the same page in terms of what you're trying to achieve. It really helps the board and the management team too in terms of justification of the projects. And it's not unusual that you see a project get going, maybe it's lagging behind, and you need to take a set of corrective actions. So we will often recommend those. And sometimes a corrective action can be, hey, we're understaffed on this project. We need to bring in, somebody that really knows Azure, right, to help drive
Right.
it. And we act as a bit of facilitation and also prioritization of those, so that we don't believe in kind of a monthly cadence. We believe much more in a daily or weekly cadence on things to try to get bottlenecks broken, get decisions made quickly, et cetera.
So
And a lot
are
of
you running like scrums? Are you
yeah,
running some of those agile
yeah.
concepts then?
Yeah, yeah. We'll run a scrub meeting. We'll also do kind of just weekly stand-ups with teams
Okay.
to say,
Yeah.
hey, how are things going? What's working? What's not? What can we help you with? And given background from places like Bain and NVIDIA, we can also be very helpful in terms of kind of real-time problem resolution and
Right.
brainstorming, where we say, "Hey, have you tried this? Did you look at this? Did you try this, et cetera?" So it's a process we found that works really effectively. Our model on the Quadrillion side too, by the way, is we hire people that have been line operators largely, and some folks that have been line operators as well as consultants and other kind of technology experts. So we have a hybrid model, and it works really well in terms of helping these teams be successful. I always like to say that digital transformation is, it's a bit like building a house. It's something that you may only do once in your lifetime. And a
Right.
lot of people haven't been through it, so they need coaching and mentoring. And, we're big fans of putting incentives in place so the teams get paid for what they're doing, that you try to do skills-based allocation on these initiatives, which a lot of companies don't do remarkably,
Right.
where you're
Yeah.
looking at, who are the people that you could employ on this project? What's their proficiencies? it's kind of setting yourself up for success, right? A lot of companies don't do that, but we do that, and I think that's one of the key insights I'd have for people. It's really about the strength of the teams that you deploy
Well,
against these
and their
initiatives.
motivation, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you got to
Yeah,
pay them. You got to pay them because people do what they're paid for, whether it's additional stock options, whether it's
or whatever it
additional
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
bonus. Yeah. And then it's also really important to identify what skills do I need on that project to be successful, and then allocate the team. And if you need to, bring in external skills so that you're reducing that risk.
So, what popped out in all of this? Is there an appetite for 36 to 60 months? That's a long time.
I would say yes, because again, the way we think about it is it's a portfolio. So we may have some quick hit initiatives that we can get done in 3 to 6 months. There'll be others that are longer.
So
So the
you
whole,
have some milestones that
yeah,
I'm hitting that reward. But
yeah,
I was just talking to someone earlier today. Um, Managers tend to last about 3 years in their
yeah,
positions.
yeah.
So if this is beyond them, are they the bottleneck a lot of times, the mid managers? Because they might not see it through all the way. Most of the time, they're going to be gone before the project
Yeah,
finishes.
I mean that does happen on occasion for sure, but again, we try to transition things where we can. Sometimes people do resign outright, so you have to kind of then troubleshoot and figure out how you're going to backfill somebody's role. But we found that we approach it first and foremost, almost like a stockbroker would, right? When you're buying stocks and bonds, what's your risk reward profile, right? To optimize your return. So we approach it from that perspective first and then try to sequence things in a way that you can deliver on a pretty
Some
consistent basis.
value. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, there's greater risk on those initiatives that go out 3 years for a variety of reasons. It's not just human capital, but it can also be
The
market
market
risk, et cetera.
changes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why it's so important to kind of be real vigilant and disciplined around measuring the KPIs. And we've worked with clients in situations where we build out an initiative, and then 14 months later, the market changes. Good example was back when the Fed started raising interest rates. We were doing some work for a fintech company, about a $500 million fintech company in New York, and we had architected business cases, and then the world changed as those rates went up. So we literally went through and recast all of the business cases. A couple we killed outright and said this isn't going to work in this environment, and we added one or two, and then the rest of them we kind of resized in the middle
So
of the program to help drive that
yeah,
success.
so this is more program or portfolio management more than
Yep.
project management, because you have several projects that are going either in parallel or sequential. It doesn't matter.
Right.
All part of this digital transformation program that you put into place. So that makes a lot of sense. This is a long journey. Um, how often do you get to the end, or how often does it happen? Like Intel's gone through something like this with our
Sure.
CEO,
Yeah.
right? 3 years in, and they're like, "Ah, we don't have the appetite for this anymore.
Right.
Ditch him." And you know, it
Yeah.
didn't make any sense to me. But I wasn't in the board meeting. So,
Yeah.
how often does that happen to you guys, where they've lost the appetite? And then how do you overcome that when executive management's like going, guys, this is taking a long time, and you're saying, yeah, but we're hitting our metrics.
Yeah, I think we don't hear that as much as you would think, and I think that's because again,
Oh,
I'm a baseball guy, so I'll use the baseball analogy. We deliver on a lot of singles and doubles as part of our program, so there's
I
kind
like
of
that.
real value there, right? And then sure, we have triples and home runs that we're targeting, and everybody knows those are riskier, sometimes more expensive. So we're careful to monitor those and to take decisions to try to make them successful, right? So, and we found that approach really works very well because it doesn't lead to the fatigue you're talking about that you see in a lot of managers and frankly boards of directors too, where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you guys have been at this for 6 months. What have you been doing? We can point to material things that have actually happened that are yielding real value. And again, we tend to focus on the value that says, what's the EBITDA impact of it? What's the gross margin impact? And we have these metrics that we can measure, and we're kind of
And then
I'll
you can
use
show the real
yeah, we're
value.
Yeah, we try to be really disciplined around that, as I said. So
Well, that makes a lot of sense because if you're showing me value every month or a couple months, then I'm like, okay, things are going well.
right.
I don't get I don't get consternation about. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'll write that check, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
every month that happens. Okay, now the other big question I have for you: how in the last 2 years? It's been 2 years and 3 months now that Gen AI was unleashed on the public. It's been around for longer than that, but really unleashed on the public, right? It's like it came out, it's coming out, right?
Mhm.
Quinceañeras, for those on the West Coast, know exactly what I'm talking about. How has that affected your digital transformations? Has it accelerated it? Has it stalled it? Are people chasing shiny objects now where they're ignoring fundamental digital transformation? What are you seeing the side effects of Gen AI being unleashed?
Yeah, I think first and foremost there is, and it's lowering. I'll say that before I say it. I think there's a lot of confusion in the market. There's a lot of middle managers, boards of directors, et cetera, who don't really understand what AI is. They naturally jump to it's a large language model, right? Which,
Right.
as you know, is not necessarily true.
No, that's not.
Um, and and the other component and what we've found to be very successful is we look at AI and agentic AI in particular, just as another, kind of, quiver in our quill, if you will, around transformation, right? So if you're going to pursue a transformation program, sure, you'll have some elements of AI associated with it, no doubt about that. And it's important to do that. But there's parts of the technology that isn't very well proven, frankly, and there's others that work really well. As you know, the use case around chatbots, very clear, cost reduction opportunity in terms of customer service uh, and agents, and then also likely maybe an improvement in cost delivery in terms of, speed of answer and things like that. So that one's
Right.
a real clear case that works, and I think most people have accepted that. It's kind of moved into the band of it's kind of normal to expect a company to maybe pursue that as part of a transformation initiative. Then you have other ones that are more far afield, some proven, some unproven. So you have to kind of, deal with it on a use case basis is the way we always approach it. And to try to treat it as it's not monolithic, we have to kind of tease it out. We have an approach. We started a kind of a strategy. I'll call it a practice within Quadrillion, where we have a strategy we call React, which is reinventing enterprises with AI and corporate transformation. And the reason we call it that is we feel that there's a lot of opportunity to deploy these agents in particular to help drive better outcomes. And the way we define that is we don't define agents as, because I've seen some definitions where it's kind of fully autonomous agents that are going to take one process from A to B. Our experience is it's almost never that. I mean, if you're
Right.
lucky, you might get that, but you do need some element of human intervention. And I think
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and what large language models I think have proven, and we use things like AutoGen and Crew AI for orchestration as well on some of our engagements, and we found that to be very successful. What we found is that having that human intervention is really important. And then the other way we think about it is our process is one where we spend some discovery time. We'll do some workshops with management teams or others, functional teams, to try to tease out these use cases. And then again, since we're very data oriented, we will look at the use case and then try to model it out, almost do a process model to say, because again, we have lean backgrounds, so that's the way we think
Right. So
about it
there you
is,
go. Yeah.
yeah, so we say, okay, you start here, you end here, you have 15 steps, and here's what it's costing you today, here's what the speed of it is. We can kind of simulate that with some variables and so forth.
Mhm.
We do that so that we have got a really good baseline. And then we say, okay, how can AI help us with that, right? Whether it's large language models, whether it's just kind of additional process automation, whether it's some other machine learning capabilities, whatever it is, what can we do to kind of optimize that end to end? And sometimes it's cross-functional process, right? And then how much will it cost us to build a pilot? And then we try to run that pilot, build that pilot, quickly, run that pilot in tandem with the current process, right? This is kind of classic lean, right?
Right.
And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
yeah, and then say, okay, the old process was, 15 days and cost us this much, and with AI, we can do it in 6 days and it costs us this much, right? So that you have very
So it's an
clear,
easy.
yeah, and then it's real easy to say, you know what, we need to scale this, and to scale it, we're going to need to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then the other thing I'll mention too, and you probably have had other guests talk about this, but the real wild card on the AI side, I think, is not so much process and kind of defining what I just talked about. The challenge is always when you look at the back end costs of the large language models, they can be enormous, and people don't consider that. So one of the things we always encourage our clients to look at is, yes, you can use large language models, Anthropic, Claude, and ChatGPT, et cetera. There may be a use case, and there usually is a use case when you think about these, to try to create, small language models or small models to
I'm
reduce the
seeing,
cost.
yeah, I'm seeing this in droves. People are
Yeah,
flocking away from a trillion parameter model
right.
to a 3 billion parameter or 2 billion
Yeah,
parameter model that can run on a laptop
yeah, that's
and
right. Yeah,
with with virtually zero cost when
right.
you
And
look,
you can also
or minimal.
customize you can customize and train the smaller models more easily too, right? So it's kind
Yeah,
of a
absolutely.
win-win. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm
So we,
seeing some really cool new architectures that are unleashing a whole bunch of new use cases
uh-huh.
beyond the chatbot, like you were mentioning, some agentic.
Yep.
Man, I wish I came up with a better word. That one I can't just wrap my head around. But I'm seeing some new use cases that we're starting to not use the Gen AI as a generator, but as a natural language processor,
Yeah,
which is very compelling, especially when it comes to interfacing with humans, right? Where I can now have a conversation
yep,
with my policy book. I can now
yep,
have a conversation with a manual, a repair manual. Very interesting concepts, really easy to spin up quickly
yep.
nowadays. I think there's a lot there that we haven't even thought of yet that I think we're still possibilities.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then the other thing I'll mention too, just on the architecture side, since we spend
Yeah.
a fair amount of time on this, there is kind of an evolution of the architecture, right? So typically in these enterprises, you may be using, some element of ChatGPT and Claude, and then start to migrate to more data center based GPUs, and then maybe even adopt some of the great technology that my former employer NVIDIA has around. Having things in your data center, or just things that
Yeah.
are more advanced for you to use. So, and understanding that progression and kind of identifying it in terms of milestones, I think is also really important, because what we find is the use cases are often driven by business owners, and then the underlying architecture naturally is the job of the CIO, who worries about it because he or she is not interested in equipment proliferation and multiple platforms and all this stuff. So you have to,
I know exactly where you're coming from. I was a
yeah.
CIO of $1 billion company, and yeah, it's like you went where? You went to Best Buy and just bought stuff? What were you thinking? Right?
Yeah.
It's not secure. I can't do asset management. I can't keep track of everything. So when you're in an organization that is timid to adopt this, because there's a lot of worry around Gen AI on data privacy and security and things like that. How do you approach them to to move forward? Because if they don't, they're probably going to get run over by a competitor.
Yeah, so we just on the security part of it, we're big fans of looking at SOC 2 compliance, right? As a kind of a signal of what people are doing. And then I think part of the diligence process in the pilot is also to understand elements of security and privacy and things of that sort. That's got to be part of the lane of work, if you will. And one of the other kind of things that we recommend is standing up a KPI dashboard to actually measure the AI agent that you put together, so you can really understand number of tokens used, how often is it used, who's using all that stuff that, ideally you'd want to know in any software solution. You
Right.
really want to make that an explicit part of your pilot so that if you do scale afterward, you have it already in place. So you have your Tableau or Power BI dashboards or whatever in place so that you can understand, and try to forecast that element of cost and performance as well, right? So that's really important. But going
I
back to
like
your
that.
question around risk and degree of uncomfortableness, we found that as we go into a discovery phase with folks, we try to be real, plain spoken around how this technology works and what it means. And we've even had situations where, we'll be talking with, head of procurement who, maybe is not very well versed, been with the company 25 years, real expert in his area, really great person, but has not been exposed to some of the stuff. So we'll go into, Claude or ChatGPT and show him some
Some
ways
things
that
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 they can do.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know this existed. So some of it is kind of level setting, right? And it's not unusual when we go into our workshops too to spend a little bit of time, demystifying things, and I think really to emphasize the point that AI is not a panacea, right? That it's a bit. Well, always use the sniper analogy. You want to fire it at your best targets, and then prove it out before you think about migrating it elsewhere. And it's evolving so quickly that there are some use cases I think that make more sense rather than less right now. In the spirit of risk reward, chatbots one of them. There's others that we've seen in marketing and sales
Right.
naturally, right? And then the other dynamic, as I'm sure you know, is a lot of major platforms, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot
They're
or
they're
even some of
putting
the
that
ERP.
into their
Yeah,
solution.
they're adding it naturally into those platforms. So you have to try to weigh, should we just use their AI, which will cost more, right? It's an added cost usually,
Yeah.
versus kind of build our own to help with that process workflow. And there's a trade-off there. So
A lot for executives to think about in their digital transformation. It's like hitting a moving target,
yeah,
or even worse, it's like a sniper rifle, and I've got several thousand moving targets. Which one
yeah,
do I pick off first? So, if I'm an executive, I've been reading CIO magazine, which is always a bad thing. Uh, because it gets ideas in your heads, and you're like, well, then I can
yeah.
get rid of half of my developers. I can get rid of my PR staff. I can get rid of all these people and save money. Have you heard them saying this yet? Have they?
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah, and
So
and I
so
think,
how do you counteract that? Because you and I both know that's not
yeah.
true.
Right, right. It's not. And again, what we do in our workshop is try to, and we do it even before the workshop. We try to solicit ideas on use cases. We will then bring in kind of what we're seeing in the market on use cases, and then try to prioritize those, right, in a way that makes sense. And then the process definition and simulation stuff is all about how much are you spending today? Because people also, even, forget about headcount for a minute. They have
Yeah.
these kind of perceived notions on how much non-labor costs they're spending too on some of the stuff. So, trying to set the expectation and saying, here's how big the box is here. So if it's a small box and you get a 90% improvement, it's still a small number
Yeah.
versus here's a bigger box. And if you get a
Can I get
20%
10%
improvement,
or 20? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And those are the conversations we have. We also usually have the conversation around it's not going to be fully automated anyway. It can help people remove administrative tasks and more mundane tasks to make them more effective, kind of deliver the information they need to make better decisions quickly. So, a lot of our focus and a lot of our discussions in the workshops, revolve around speed, right? So today it takes you 20 days to close your books in finance. If we implement these things, we think you can get it down to 6, right?
That's
And
huge.
yeah, which is important to the CFO. But there's other areas of the business too that I think that's relevant for. So again, to answer your question around comfort level and getting people kind of over the hurdle, there is some upfront education around it. There's no doubt about that. And it's also, it also helps a lot with buy-in to get their ideas and then to really do your kind of due diligence, or which is really our discovery phase, to figure out where to focus and why, right? Because to your point, there's a lot of targets out there. You could go after a lot of
Yeah.
things, but you really shouldn't. You should focus it down to the few that matter in areas where you think you can make a material difference, and just focus
Well,
on those.
and that goes to your key metrics,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Right.
Yeah,
Those are the things that you've agreed with them. Hey, we can save you this much money, or increase revenue, or whatever the key metric is. They, as long as they can see progress, and we can show that progress, that's the benefit.
yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
Um,
So,
well, cool. Hey, this has been wonderful, George. Thanks for coming on the show. We're
oh,
out of
sure.
time. I know you and I could talk for a lot longer, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
we could go on for hours.
Yeah, we could. So, but thank you for coming on the show. If people want to know more, learn more about Quadrillion Partners, where do they go?
Yeah, our website is best, quadrillionpartners.com.
Okay.
We actually have a new website that's being stood up this weekend, so you'll see a lot more detail around our client success stories and our AI practice and so forth. So, yeah, go there, and folks can always reach out to me directly from there. So,
All right. George, thanks again. I appreciate your time.
yeah, thanks, Darren. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.